pitch clock, I thought was going to have at least some resistance. If you were to poll me 3 weeks ago, even before spring training, there's going to be old heads that don't like it, traditionalists that don't like it. It's going to be 75-25 people are going to support it, maybe 70-30, something like that. Honestly, it's like 99-1.
Yeah.
I can't find almost anybody that doesn't like it. I mean, there's a few people on Twitter that bellyache, but what's been your observations about the popularity and just the institutional change of the pitch clock?
It looks and feels more like baseball to me now. I mean, the amount of dead time that had sort of come to exist in the sport the last 15 years, 20 years was extraordinary. And you don't necessarily realize as it's happening, right? Like, it's like a slow weight gain. You know, all of a sudden you look in the mirror and you're like, hey, whoa, what happened here, right? Like, that's what it was. And now you've gotten rid of the nothing and you have more of the something in baseball. And it looks like the game that everybody grew up watching, whether you're in the 70s, 80s, even into the 90s when things started to go. The thing I always say to people is this. It became a thing in baseball, particularly in the last decade or so, where it didn't matter the score of the game. Right? The game was going to be long no matter what. It could be 2-1. It could be 10-9. It was going to be long. And that felt unnatural in that sport. Baseball forever, right? The longer games were the higher scoring games, which makes total mathematical sense. The more stuff that's going on, the more runs that are being scored, the longer it should last. That was no longer the case. Everything was just long. You'd play a 3.5-hour game that was 2-1. We did it all the time. And you'd look down at the end of the night and it was like, what are we doing here? Like, how did that take this long? And so now you've sort of like reverted back to normal where if you have an unbelievably pitched game on both sides, you're getting out of there in about 2 hours. If you have a 10-8 game, it might take 3:05, might take 3:10. And that seems to make sense. It's such a more watchable product. You know, the other thing I think is it makes it a much, much, much better watch on television. I think it had become a really tough TV product with that amount of dead time. TV matters in a very big way.
Huge. It's all of those things. And I asked Tom Glavine a week and a half ago. He was a player rep for a long time. Why would players have resisted this? He didn't really have a good answer because, as I said to him, what American worker would be told, okay, you can have the choice of either coming into work 9 to 5 or you can leave at 3:30? We would all choose 3:30. Why was the PA resisting this?
I think part of it is the politics. Like, you have a bargaining chip and you want to try and use it to your advantage. I think also baseball players have come a really long way just in the last few years in regards to change. And it might have actually started with like the analytical revolution, if you really want to look at it. You know, there was a time 6 years ago where like when a team had an iPad in the bullpen, when a guy was working on stuff, between starts, everybody would look at him like they were crazy. And now literally every team has a series of iPads and cameras in every bullpen session that every guy throws. And the players, even the 38-year-old starters, they're all in on it. They're all in on it. These guys are obsessed with the data. They're obsessed with the information. And I think somewhere along the line, baseball players became a little bit less scared of change and a little bit less scared of technology. And so I think that sort of flow within the sport translates a little bit here where, they're not as necessarily just staunchly averse to change for the sake of it, which I think was the case. There was a stubbornness in baseball for a really long time that, hey, this sport is perfect. We don't need to touch it. It is what it is. Leave us alone. And it's no longer a leave us alone kind of sport. They are interested in more information. They are interested in things like that.
The voice of the Padres, Jesse Agler, joins us in studio. It might just be being defensive of what you do. It's like if you're successful at broadcasting or successful at being a mechanic or successful at whatever, you're like, what I do is great. And so players just getting defensive about the thing that they do really well. I mean, I guess that might have just been human nature.
Yeah, but again, like you said, though, they've been really, really positive about it. I mean, Machado the other day, who's a pretty traditional, kind of guy, he got rung up on an automatic third strike. He ended up getting ejected, which wasn't even so much about, I think, the rules. It was just about how it was handled in the moment and perhaps a relationship with the umpire in question. But after the game, he goes, "Hey, look, these are the rules. We got to adjust." And I was almost like surprised. I was like, "Yeah, Manny, go for it." And he was saying, "This is the new world, and so we got to be ready for these changes."
There's a lot of cool young baseball players now.
Yeah,
there's a lot of good stuff to watch. You guys are going to get Tatis back here soon. He's certainly one of those guys. As you make your road trips or have teams come in, who's one guy that you're like, oh, I can't wait. I'm circling that series already. I got to see him.
That's the fun thing. And you know what? That goes back to your last question too, right? Because I think the infusion of young talent and teams allowing young guys to get to the big leagues and flourish earlier on in their careers also probably part about being cooler with change because your general like stars are younger than they used to be. They really made you wait back in the day for a lot of reasons, and that's no longer the case. This is why the new schedule is great, too. Every team plays every team. Makes our jobs a little bit more difficult. But now if you're like a kid in Kansas City, you don't have to say, oh, boy, I wonder if Fernando Tatis Jr. is going to come to town this year. You're going to see him every other year. You're going to see him every other year. It used to be we went to KC last year, the Padres, first time in 20 years. 20 years.
Is that right?
So, like, think about all the Padres are a bad example, but think about all the guys that have come and gone on that roster over those years that, like, some kid there would have enjoyed getting to see, never had the opportunity to see. Now, every other year you play at every stadium. So I think that's really good. But there's guys coast to coast. It wasn't that long ago that we talked about Mike Trout being this singular superstar, right? And everybody was all frustrated around baseball because Trout's personality is very muted and very quiet. He didn't want to be the face of the sport necessarily. He's a great player, but that was just all he cared about. Now there's guys everywhere. There's guys in New York. There's guys in San Diego. There's guys in L.A. There's just so much more exciting young star power all over the country. It's great. It's a great time for baseball, and I think and hope that with the rule changes, you're able to sort of start bringing more casual fans back into the fold, younger fans who maybe couldn't stay up to watch the end of games, that kind of stuff.
Somebody called me the other day, a listener, and asked, what would the Mets have to give up to get Shohei Ohtani? And I said, well, everything. You'd have to trade everything is what I would imagine. And he's like, could we hold this guy back? And I don't know what the trade package will be offered for if the Angels put him up on the block. But how do you contextualize who Shohei Ohtani is, what he would mean to a team, and what would be proper payment?
I think about this a lot. Now, look, he's going to be a free agent at the end of the year. So the trade conversation is a little bit more complicated just in that how much can you really give up for a rental? Now, we've seen teams give up plenty for rentals in the past, and he is a unicorn. I cannot intellectualize his value. I just can't. Like, I haven't gotten there yet. What he does is literally unique. We all overuse that word, but it's true. It is unique what he does. And then that's not even touching the branding and the marketing and the global reach of his star power. I mean, he's got to be, right, like the most valuable commodity in the history of baseball, maybe in the history of American sports. You're talking like Barcelona FC type of like global interest on that kind of guy. And so free agency is going to be fascinating. All the big players are going to be involved, I am sure, after this season. If a team was going to trade for him this year, you're giving up your best prospect. You're probably giving up your second best prospect, probably giving up a couple of guys on your major league roster right now. And like we said, that's a rental. There's no guarantee that you're going to sign him afterwards, although I'm sure that team would try right away. I seriously don't know what free agency is going to look like for him because he's just such a different kind of talent than anybody has ever been.
What did the Padres give up for Soto?
They gave up a bunch of top prospects. And
like three of their top four.
Three of their top four, something like that. Yeah, C.J. Abrams, James Wood, Mackenzie Gore. Two of those guys were in the big leagues at the time. Luke Voit was in that trade, who was the starting first baseman for the Padres. Now, Soto had the remainder of last year,
True.
all of this year, all of next year before he hits free agency.
True.
But he doesn't pitch.
I was going to say, you're giving up what you gave up for Soto and then more because you're also getting a starting pitcher.
It's crazy.
Are we watching Babe Ruth?
Yeah. I don't think there's any question. And in an era when it's far more difficult to do these things, I would think, there's that. But that's also part of it, right? Is like in free agency, our team's going to trust that he's going to be able to stay healthy. Our team's going to trust that he's going to be able to continue to do both. Like from an outside perspective, and I don't mean this as a criticism, but it feels a little tenuous, right? Like every time he goes out there, it's like, how is he doing? Our brains can't process it because none of us got to see Babe Ruth. None of us got to see anybody kind of do this at this level. So it's like you just sort of feel like it's always got the possibility of going sideways, but then he goes out there and he just has a most incredible season.
Right. Babe Ruth was setting home run records. So, and he's a mythological figure at the dawn of the sport's creation in many ways. So, like, it's impossible to ever really compare anybody to him. But in terms of the fact that he has a legacy of doing both things great, I mean,
there's nobody else between then and now.
Right. That's the direct line.
It's a two-man conversation. And look, the other thing about Babe Ruth is like that was an era of creating mythology around athletes. And that continued for several decades after that. It was a less cynical society, all of that. So like back then you were lionized, you were turned into something larger than life, and that was protected fiercely by the institution in a way that just doesn't exist anymore. So it becomes a more difficult conversation. But, I mean, from a baseball on-field perspective, like I said, it's a two-man conversation.
The only thing that Shohei could do better is smash a ton of hot dogs, let himself get a little overweight, and chase naked women through train cars. And then we'd really have something. We'd really have the next Babe Ruth.
In black and white footage. With funny music playing in the background.
With funny music. And the speed of the film just a little bit too sped up.